Plus, I had a hard time with it since I adored the Griffith Show. Despite his comic timing, Don Knotts was perpetually depressed. His father was an alcoholic and violent man who threatened him with knives when he was a little boy. It was an indescribable nightmare. Even when he was winning 5 Emmys, he was unable to do much due to his crippling fear attacks. Tragically, he became blind in his latter years due to macular degeneration and later passed away from lung cancer. This is the tale of a man who brought joy to many through his actions, but who was never truly happy himself. Don Knotts' second to eldest child was born in 1924 in Morgantown, West Virginia, 14 years before he was. Having another child was never part of their plans. His parents had recently lost their farm, his mother was in her 40s, and his father was struggling to make ends meet. Space, money, and comfort were all in short supply for a new baby. To ensure their survival, Don and his brothers slept on a cot in the kitchen, and they shared a room with strangers who paid rent. Aside from the stress and noise, he did not have access to any personal space. Cold and clear it was that they were squeezing by. He was frail and diminutive. He was known to consistently wear ill-fitting second-hand clothing. Peers teased him while he was at school. Returning home made matters worse. William, his dad, was drunk, nearly blind, and suffering from a mental illness. He was unreliable and frequently furious as he sat on the couch. Don couldn't get to the door because of him. There were instances when his father threatened him with a knife. Don felt fear at all hours of the day and night. At the age of 13, he came close to losing his father to pneumonia. I felt like a loser. I was unhappy most of the time. Don remembered that statement and felt relieved despite the sadness it conveyed. Still, I remained terrified. He came from a family of 4, but his 3 older brothers had spoilt him since they were kids. They became angry at Don from time to time and drank excessively. They saw him as feeble and useless. When it came to the brothers, Shad was the only one who stood out. He shed some light on Don's gloomy world while making fun of him. A fatal asthma attack befell Shad. The one relative who had ever brought a smile to Don's face has passed away. It was lonely for Don because he couldn't rely on anyone. In his imagination, he created stories and imagined companions. That was his approach. His training in ventriloquism began at that time. He started performing in public places like schools and churches as a dummy named Danny. He was a mere 15 years old. This wasn't an idle pursuit, it served as an escape hatch. For the first time he received cheers from the crowd, not his brothers nor the doll. After failing at his New York venture, he returned to West Virginia University. After that there was Del Chuy. He was enlisted in 1943 at the tender age of 19. He wasn't a drill instructor for the Marines, although that was a common misconception. He was never meant to fight. He was uncomfortably thin and terrified. The Army dispatched him to the 6,817th Special Services Battalion so he could demonstrate exciting activities to the troops. While serving overseas, Don appeared in a military comedy program called Stars and Gripes. He confidently made his way from island to island. At first he pretended to be Danny Hooch Matador. Something changed after Don had been ventriloquism for 2 years, even though he had been doing it since he was a child. People were laughing at the dummy instead of him, and he didn't like it. Danny insisted on hosting the show even though he wasn't supposed to. Don was sick of being treated like a piece of wood. Al Cheshko could see it too. By 1945 all had changed. Returning to America, Don was aboard a ship traversing the South Pacific. One night he tossed the fake overboard. In retrospect, Don admitted that he had no qualms about mentally associating the dummy's lifelike screams with its sinking. Suddenly it felt like severing a link in a chain. He would not stow away behind an imposter any longer. People would laugh at him because he was himself. Upon his return to the United States in January 1946, Don enrolled at West Virginia University once again. The GI Bill allowed him to attend college. He started to cultivate the nervous, tense persona that would later become his trademark while studying theater and performing in college productions. On this occasion there was no fool, merely Don Knotts. A few individuals realized it. While he was a student, he crossed paths with Catherine Metz. They couldn't have been more dissimilar. She exuded an air of tranquility and deep contemplation. Despite her being engaged to someone else, Don refused to back down. He succeeded in his attempt to seize her. Their nuptials took place in 1948. In the same year, Don earned a degree in acting. Don Knotts borrowed $100 and an acting degree before he left West Virginia in 1948, just 24 years old. His one and only lifelong goal was to make it as an actor. He boarded a bus to New York City in the hopes of landing a job thanks to his experience entertaining troops during the war. Unfortunately, New York was unconcerned. The city gorged itself on him. He was relentless in his pursuit of radio jobs. Not only did they reject him, but they also paid him no mind. A skinny, unsteady guy from Morgantown was a mystery to the directors. Meanwhile, he had recently tied the knot with K. Metz. People lost faith when the bills started rolling in. On the verge of giving up, he continued. However, his life was spared by the very army connections that had gotten him into the war. Work eventually came his way. While it lacked excitement, it did constitute something. He landed a role on the 1953 national TV soap opera Search for Tomorrow. Everything changed after that. He portrayed Wilbur Peterson, a non-enthusiastic, anxious, scarred individual who avoided all but his sister in social situations. Don had to delve into his own history in order to give Wilbur life. He had a mentally ill father and a poor upbringing. Despite the wait, he persisted. He performed in over 500 shows in just 2 years. Regardless of his exhaustion or anxiety, he persisted. After that part, casting directors took notice of him. Along with meeting Andy Griffith, it brought him to Broadway for No Time for Sergeants. Concurrently, in 1954, he landed a small role on the children's program Howdy Doody. It was viewed by millions. There was a successful area. An extremely fidgety character by the name of Tim Tremble he was. Adults took note, while children found the chaotic, tense energy hilarious. What started out as an innocent child's role became a dress rehearsal for the role that would catapult him to stardom. He was actually nervous, but he managed to make it funny. Being the camera's operator wasn't a picnic. Concern for his well-being tore Don to shreds. Despite doctors' assurances to the contrary, he persisted in believing he was ill. Every morning, he'd be certain that he had a terrible illness. Because of his racing thoughts, he experienced trembling, nausea and vomiting, as well as panic attacks. A profound dread from her youth was the initial spark. The pressures of the entertainment industry had brought that terror back, and this time it was worse. To help him relax, the doctors prescribed him medication. The majority of the tablets were sedatives and primitive tranquilizers. In the 1950s, that was considered the norm. Eventually, though, he would merely require their presence to traverse a scene. While doing Search for Tomorrow, he also did Howdy Doody. Even though everyone around him was laughing, he was actually sobbing. On occasion, he seemed unrecognizable and forgot his lines. The director noticed it and devised a plan to overcome it. Although the drugs dulled his senses and made it harder for him to control his emotions when he wasn't filming, he never failed to deliver when the cameras were rolling. In the years leading up to 1956, Don Knotts was no different from any other struggling actor. His eccentric persona, the nervous, fidgety man, shot to fame after an appearance on The Steve Allen Show. However, this was not a random thought. In West Virginia, Don witnessed a man whose trembling was so severe that he spilt water all over himself. The image lingered in his thoughts. His dreams about it reappeared after a long interval. Standing up, he jotted down the stunt, which he later turned into a funny joke. The American people quickly recognized him. From 1956 through 1959, Don continued to appear on the show. After that, in 1959, Don relocated to Hollywood with The Tonight Show. Someone trailed after him. However, this was not his initial major encounter with a hero of the future. It was in the 1955 Broadway production of No Time for Sergeants that Don met Andy Griffith. Don was just a minor player, but that didn't stop them from getting along. They were really charismatic, even though they barely shared stage time. Don had recently returned from serving his country during the war. He entertained the troops with ventriloquism on his show, Stars and Gripes. After the war, he returned to school with the intention of pursuing a career in show business. The 1958 film adaptation of No Time for Sergeants featured Don. On stage, he reprised his role opposite Andy Griffith. Because it was his debut feature film, it had an impact. The film's box office take was over $7. $6 million was a substantial sum at the time it was made. On set, they spoke a lot. In addition, they shared their ideas. Don figured out how to be humorous by being ambiguous. The image of the anxious mess who deludes himself into thinking he's in command kept popping into his head. He intended to use it as a trademark. The life-altering call then appeared out of nowhere. The year 1960 was February 15th. Andy Griffith portrayed a sheriff from a small town on The Danny Thomas Show. At the time, Don was watching television at home. That program would eventually replace The Andy Griffith Show. Upon picking up the phone, Don promptly dialed Andy's number. In spite of the fact that they hadn't spoken in nearly 3 years, Don nevertheless dared to ask, "Don't you think Sheriff Andy Taylor should have a constable?" It was a bizarre idea, but they decided to talk anyway. Yet, Andy found it enjoyable. He arranged for them to meet with Sheldon Leonard, the producer.
It was fantastic timing since Don's gig with Steve Allen was also coming to an end. After only a few weeks of applying, Don was hired. Then Barney Fife arrived. Many believe that Barney was merely Don's reoccurring nervousness, but in reality, it was far more difficult. He was changed by Don. There was more to Barney's nervousness than mere fear. On top of that, he was arrogant, boisterous, and self-assured. He appeared to know a lot, but in reality, he knew very little. That distinction was the reason Barney worked. At first, they assumed Don would play the straight man, and Andy would provide comic relief. But Andy caught a glimpse of something in the second episode. His role would be that of the straight man, he informed the cast, while Don would be the comedian. Everything changed after that. Barney was very sentimental for Don. He took pride in his demeanor, gait, gun carrying, and occasional brawls with Andy and Thelma Lou. A lot of thought went into every step. Don turned a potentially ridiculous business partner into one of the most iconic TV personalities of all time. He was a huge hit with the audience, and the critics alike. The years 1961 to 1963, Don Knotts won a trio of Emmys consecutively. He was nominated for supporting actor rather than lead actor. In a sense, he became the program's beating heart. His large eyes, his wacky voice, and the trembling of his hands whenever things went wrong are all things I will never forget. He turned what could have been a minor role into one of television's most iconic moments. Recall of the one-bullet rule is high. Because Andy didn't trust Barney to load his own gun, he told him to keep that single bullet in his shirt pocket. However, each time it occurred, Barney still inadvertently shot the ceiling. Like a misbehaving child, he would put down the gun, appear distraught, and depart. For that type of humor, words weren't necessary. It was spot on every time, and Don was the master of authenticity. On the other hand, Barney wasn't naive. From American history to karate, he believed he knew it all. He would put on an air of superiority whenever things went wrong, only to crumble under the pressure. His vocals were awful when he overstimulated, but they were lovely when he sang gently alongside Andy. Don was unfazed by the ups and downs. Things took a turn for the unexpected thereafter. Even though things were improving, Don left in 1965. His assumption that the show would conclude after 5 seasons was based on Andy's prediction. Universal Studios signed Don to a film deal. After agreeing to appear in 5 films, Andy eventually decided against it. Extra performances would take place. Don could not come back. Because he was already trapped, that broke his heart. Despite his reluctance, he knew he had to depart. Barney's departure was scripted. He was promoted and relocated to Raleigh in search of employment opportunities in the bustling city. But the gap was known by the fans. Even though the show continued until 1968, many still felt it was missing something without him. Don returned as a special guest for a handful of shows in 1966 and 1967. His presence, however, caused the screen to light up once more. As if he had never left, he strolled back into Mayberry. To top it all off, hey, guess what? His total Emmys for that one part increased to 5 when he added 2 more for those brief roles. A supporting character in a comedy has never done anything like that before. In 1986, after a long period of time, Don wore the badge for the final time. For the Return to Mayberry concert, the band reunited. Despite their advanced years and sluggishness, they retained their enchantment. The return of Barney Fife to television seemed to occur at the last possible moment. Don Knotts was no longer associated with the TV show as of 1964. The Incredible Mr. Limpet was an odd little film in which he starred. There were elements of both real life and cartoons. After transforming into a talking fish, he assisted the Navy in locating Nazi submarines while playing the role of a reserved man who was mad about fish. It may not make much sense, but it did the trick. The film was a financial bust, earning only $35,000. Don Knotts proved he could carry a film on his own, even though it only made $7 million. Don also did something courageous that year. As he believed the Andy Griffith Show was winding down, he inked a 5-picture deal with Universal Studios. But the show went on, and Andy Griffith continued hosting even after he left. Because of the movie deal, Don was unable to return. It became clear that decision marked the start of a significant development. The Ghost and Mr. Smith was a film. The 1966 film Chicken was a financial smash. Its production cost was around $670,000, but it made at least 5 times that amount. In the end, it earned around $100 and was the 34th highest grossing film. $1 million was altered. His success earned him a 5-year prison sentence from Universal. Don went for a run after that. He portrayed a man compelled to join the space program despite his fear of heights in 1967's The Reluctant Astronaut. Due to its release 2 days before the tragic Apollo 1 fire, the film, which featured actual NASA footage, was quickly forgotten, even though it contained accurate footage. The following year, 1968, saw the release of The Shakiest Gun in the West. This was an adaptation of a classic Bob Hope comedy. Not a smashing success, but enough to keep the lights on. He had widespread acclaim in the American Midwest and South. Critics in New York City weren't too interested in him, but audiences in smaller towns couldn't get enough of him. In 1969, Don experimented with a new strategy. He portrayed a racy magazine publisher, similar to Hugh Hefner in The Love God. It was an unusual decision. It was not purchased. Only $15 were taken in by the film. 400,000 were altered. Don made an unsuccessful effort to alter people's perceptions of him. In 1970, he expressed his inability to comprehend public desires in an interview with the Chicago Tribune. He was worried that his nervous performance would become old for everyone. He departed from Universal with 1971's How to Frame a Fig, his final feature film. It was a bust as well, earning only $21. It ranks 86th for the year after adjustments, with $6 million. After 5 years, the business decided to end the agreement. Change came quickly to Hollywood. The rules had been changed by new, more aggressive films like Easy Rider, Midnight Cowboy, and The Graduate, so Don's clean comedic style didn't work anymore. Being 47 years old, and experiencing a slowdown in his movie business, left him unsure of what to do next. However, that was far from the last. The popular sitcom Three's Company had to look for new rental space in 1979. The original cast was getting ready to leave for a spin-off, so Don was brought in to help. There was initial tension in the group. They were terrified of Knotts, according to John Ritter, because of his fame. It was clear that Don had brought something unique when the camera started rolling, though. Ralph Furley, his new character, was ostentatious, brash and conceited at all times, but particularly around women. But that's the funny part. Despite his best efforts, he was never really smooth. He was beloved by many for reasons beyond his humor. Also, they were smitten with his appearance. Mr. Furley sported wild attire, including colorful suits adorned with prominent collars and ascots. Insanely, it evoked the 1970s. Don brought a lot of life to the part, and those clothes complemented it nicely. Because of his cartoon dog movements and funny expressions, he was the life of the party the moment he entered the room. The writers ramped up their mockery of Don after Suzanne Summers' 1981 departure. Even as his role grew in significance, he remained on the show until its 1984 finale. Don remained after that. In 1987, he appeared on another series as a school director for the remaining episodes of the season. He continued his previous collaboration with Andy Griffith on Matlock after a year. In addition to his voice acting, he voiced a cartoon version of himself in the latest Scooby-Doo films. He even hosted a short-lived music show in 1970. Guests on shows like Here's Lucy and The Bill Cosby Show were common occurrences for him during that time. However, the comedic elements belied a grave narrative. A difficult life befell Don. The father, Jesse, suffered from severe mental illness and was notoriously heavy drinker. On occasion, he would brandish a knife, threaten to slit young Don's throat, and shout that he was going to murder him. This was done by them multiple times. After Don's mother asked him as an adult, "Do you remember when you were in nappies and your father held a knife to your throat?" Jesse spent 2 stints in a mental institution. It wasn't until Don passed away at the tender age of 13 that he finally felt free. He began to experiment with being humorous and being himself at that point, laying the groundwork for the persona that would bring him fame in the future. The wounds, however, persisted. According to Don's daughter Karen, he had a wide range of emotions. He was sad for a long time. Even though he could usually break free of his own thoughts, there were occasions when he was unable to do so. Most of the time he felt terrible. "I felt like a loser. I was unhappy most of the time. We were poor, and I hated my size." Those feelings persisted even after he achieved fame, he told a reporter at the time. Even though he was loved, Don never felt good enough, according to his brother-in-law. The anguish he felt during his youth remained unabated despite his fame, accolades, and humor. Anxieties, depression, and lack of confidence lurked beneath the surface of every smile. As far as 1979 was concerned, Don Knotts was unrivaled. Joining the cast of Three's Company as the eccentric owner Ralph Furley made people around the world laugh out loud. In reality, though, things changed when he found out he was going blind at the tender age of 57. Don had macular degeneration. The famous man whose wide eyes had brought him fame struggled with line reading and name recognition. Driving became risky for him. It was a nightmare, not merely a health issue. He pretended not to cry at first, but deep down he was. When he felt down, he shut down. According to his wife Laura Lee, he had an unhealthy fixation on reliving every moment of his life before he went blind. He had transformed into someone else entirely. Even his daughter Karen noticed his decline in strength. Everyone around him was taken aback by how abruptly her feelings changed. For days he stayed in bed, consumed by fear and negative thoughts. Sometimes he would lock himself in his dressing room before scenes on set because he would get scared. The fact that he had problems seeing only served to heighten his anxiety. Even as a young boy he struggled with this issue. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, hope emerged. About the year 1982, he was presented with a novel option for eye surgery by his doctors. The experiment was risky because it was a trial. It was a calculated risk that paid off for Don. His vision wasn't completely restored, but it improved to the point where he could resume his job. The pain had subsided. He experienced a brief surge of vitality. More jokes and laughter ensued from him. Someone who is blind would give up everything to see like he did, he told the New York Times. Unfortunately, it was too late. His wife was unable to cope with the mayhem throughout those years. However, his second wife Laura Lee had to endure a transformation from 1979 to 1983 as her husband became an unrecognizable stranger to her. Concern was perpetually occupying his thoughts. When he was sick, he would bring it up. Despite her pleading with him, he refused to attend therapy. Tensions persisted. The arguments reportedly escalated until Laura Lee departed, according to friends. Her divorce filing brought an end to that chapter of Don's life in relative silence. She faded from public view after the breakup and never again discussed the anguish she had endured. Things appeared to be improving for Don until he was hit again. This time, in the early 2000s, he was diagnosed with lung cancer. Cruel irony, that was. The harm had already been done when he finally stopped smoking, which had been years ago. Even his own children were in the dark at first. If anyone found out, he was afraid he would be fired from his job. However, it had already entered both lungs. Because Don is Don, he laughed it off anyhow. After hearing the bad news from his doctor, Don cracked a joke. He wanted to bring joy to people's lives, until the very end. At 81 years old, Don Knotts was still going strong, while many of his fellow artists had long since retired. He played Chicken Little's mayor, Turkey Lurkey, in the 2005 Disney film. Many years had passed since he had last worked for Disney. Considering he was practically blind at the time, it was even more astounding. Macular degeneration affected both of his eyes, but he persisted anyhow. That wasn't the end of it either. His final live-action role was a parody of the comical character he created on that 70s show, Three's Company. The animated series Hermie and Friends featured him as Wormy's voice actor. After he passed away, Air Buddies released his final scene, in which he played the role of Sniffer, a dog. Despite his deteriorating health, Don Knotts continued to perform. His first performance was in 1941, and he was still entertaining audiences 65 years later. The presence of Don's best friend Andy Griffith made his final years all the more poignant. Their 1955 meeting occurred while they were both performing in No Time for Sergeants, a Broadway musical. They were just two Southern lads with dreams of stardom. They became lifelong friends for that one job. Years later, while filming the Andy Griffith Show, Andy flipped the script to make Don the comic. That was the closeness. When Don became ill and refused to stay away, he flew in for a final visit at the hospital. He became more like a family member than a co-star. According to Don's ex-brother-in-law, Andy was the last individual to visit Don before he passed away, aside from close relatives. Ron Howard, who saw them work together when they were kids, put it best: they were friends until the very end, and had profound respect for one another. Even though Don's departure from the show in 1965 to pursue a career in film could have severed their friendship, it persisted. That demonstrates the intensity of their bond. Death came to Don Knotts late on February 24, 2006. An 81-year-old man he was. Lung cancer had left him extremely frail, and a severe asthma attack had only made matters worse. Even after the best efforts of the medical staff at Los Angeles' Cedars-Sinai, his body simply refused to cooperate. His family, including Andy Griffith, had just visited him. In the blink of an eye, one of America's most beloved comics had disappeared. Don found a way to make people laugh, but it wasn't easy. Prayers for him came in after news of his death spread. He was born in West Virginia, lived through the Great Depression, and served in WUOD. Newspapers covered his career. Multiple Hollywood A-listers recounted their experiences. Returning to their favorite moments, fans reminisced. Many were grieving at his modest and private funeral. Andy Griffith's funeral speech was so touching that it brought tears to everyone's eyes. Westwood Village Memorial Park, where Don is laid to rest alongside other notable celebrities, is located in Los Angeles. Even though he was famous, he was like family to all of his fans. People were still smiling after Don Knotts passed away,